A warm breeze crosses the trail of a park by the river at the start of a cloudless Sunday. A family walks to a shady spot, pushing a stroller and carrying chairs and snacks. The baby, under 2 years old, stops at the riverbank and points insistently at the water. The grandmother approaches and, noticing a bag caught in some branches, calls for help without saying a word. An old man with a worn-out cap, a former canoer, dives into the river and swims toward the object. While others quietly gather, he pulls the bag to shore and opens it, revealing something wrapped up and shaking inside. The baby starts clapping as a hand lifts a wet German Shepherd puppy, too weak to bark. But what that second meant, no one would understand so soon. Love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss a single one. Thanks for following us. Now, back to our story. The small town of Riverdale. Nestled along the winding banks of the Sycamore River in rural Vermont, was known for its tranquility and the kind of community where neighbors still knew each other by name. The crown jewel of the town was Sycamore Park, a stretch of greenery that followed the river's gentle curves for almost a mile, offering residents a peaceful sanctuary from the increasingly digital world beyond. On this particular Sunday morning in late spring, the park was beginning to stir with its usual weekend visitors. Joggers in brightly colored activewear traced the gravel paths. Elderly couples walked hand in hand, reminiscing about decades past. And families claimed their favorite spots under the canopy of maple trees that had witnessed generations of Riverdale residents grow up, fall in love, and build their lives. Among those arriving at the park that morning was the Parker family, Sarah and Michael, their toddler son Oliver, who had just celebrated his 20th month, and Sarah's mother, Eleanor, who had moved in with them after her husband had passed on 3 years earlier. They carried their usual Sunday morning equipment, a stroller packed with snacks, a picnic blanket, and Eleanor's worn but beloved folding chair that she insisted on bringing every week, despite Michael's offer to buy her a new one. Some things are worth keeping, Michael, she would say with a knowing smile. They carry memories. The Parkers had a ritual on these Sunday mornings. They would set up their picnic near the central gazebo, close enough to the playground for Oliver to waddle around and make friends with other children, but not so far that they couldn't enjoy the quiet murmur of the river. Oliver was what pediatricians and grandmothers alike called an old soul, quiet, observant, with eyes that seemed to take in everything with unusual intensity for a child so young. That day, as Sarah and Michael spread out their blanket and Eleanor carefully positioned her chair to catch the morning sunlight that filtered through the leaves, Oliver stood at the edge of their spot, his attention completely captured by the river. Usually, he would be content to play with the toys they brought or to practice his newfound walking skills on the soft grass. But today, something was different. "Look at him," Eleanor said, nodding toward Oliver. "He's fascinated by the water today." Sarah glanced up from arranging their picnic. "He's always loved the river. Remember how he used to point at it even before he could walk?" But as they continued setting up, Oliver's interest in the river seemed to intensify. He began pointing insistently at something in the water, making small, urgent sounds that caught Eleanor's attention. His tiny finger directed toward a spot where the current slowed in a small eddy near the bank. "Oliver, honey, what is it?" Sarah called. But the child continued his earnest pointing, now adding a rhythmic bouncing that they recognized as his way of expressing excitement. Eleanor was the first to take him seriously. At 72, she had spent a lifetime learning that children often notice things adults had trained themselves to overlook. She set down her book and made her way to where Oliver stood. "What do you see, Sweet Pea?" she asked, crouching down beside him despite her arthritic knees. Oliver answered by grabbing her hand and pulling her closer to the water's edge, his eyes never leaving whatever had captivated him. Following his gaze, Eleanor squinted against the glare of sunlight on water. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the typical debris that rivers carried: leaves, twigs, perhaps a discarded food wrapper that some careless visitor had left behind. But then, caught in a tangle of branches that protruded from the riverbank, she spotted an unnatural shape, a plastic bag, partially submerged, moving slightly with the current. Such a sight would normally warrant nothing more than a disapproving sigh about littering. But something about the way the bag moved gave Eleanor pause. It wasn't just being pushed by the current. There was an irregular motion to it, almost as if something inside was moving independently. "Michael!" she called over her shoulder, keeping her eyes fixed on the bag. "Could you come here a moment?" Michael joined them, followed by Sarah, who had noticed the sudden shift in atmosphere. "What's going on?" he asked, one hand automatically resting on Oliver's head. "There's something in that bag," Eleanor said, pointing. "Then I don't think it's just trash." Michael narrowed his eyes, following her finger. "I'll take a look," he said after a moment, kicking off his shoes. But before he could step into the water, they heard a voice from behind them. "Everything all right here, folks?" They turned to find Ray Thompson approaching them. At 65, Ray was something of a local legend in Riverdale. A former river guide who had navigated the more treacherous rivers of Colorado and Montana in his youth, he had returned to his hometown after retirement and appointed himself the unofficial steward of Sycamore Park. Every morning, rain or shine, he walked the entire length of the park, picking up trash and keeping an eye on the river he loved. "Ray, perfect timing," Michael said, explaining what they'd seen. Without hesitation, Ray slipped off his own well-worn boots and rolled up his pant legs. "Let me take a look," he said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life around water. With practiced ease, he stepped into the river, his feet finding purchase on the slippery rocks as he made his way toward the trapped bag. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. The Alvarez family, who were setting up their own picnic nearby, wandered over. Jennifer Woods, a local teacher out for her morning jog, stopped mid-stride. Two teenagers who had been skipping stones downstream abandoned their game to watch. Ray reached the bag and carefully worked it free from the branches, handling it with unexpected gentleness. As he brought it closer to shore, everyone could see that whatever was inside was indeed moving, weakly, but definitely moving. "Stand back, give it some space," Ray said as he reached the bank. He placed the bag on dry ground and carefully began to open it, his weathered hands working with surprising delicacy. The collective gasp that rose from the gathering crowd said everything. Inside the sodden plastic bag, curled into a tiny ball of wet fur, lay a German Shepherd puppy. It couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old, its eyes barely open, its small body trembling from cold and fear. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, as if breaking a spell, the puppy made a small, pitiful sound, not quite a whimper, but a faint indication of life. And in that moment, Oliver, who had been watching with uncharacteristic stillness, broke into a wide, delighted smile. He clapped his hands and laughed, a pure sound of joy that seemed to cut through the shock that had momentarily paralyzed the adults. Jennifer Woods, who had been filming the rescue on her phone, captured Oliver's reaction. She would later say that it was the contrast that struck her most, the innocent delight of the child against the sobering reality of what they had found. "We need to get this little one to a vet," Ray said, his voice bringing everyone back to the situation at hand. "It's alive, but just barely." Sarah, who had been standing frozen, suddenly snapped into action. "Dr. Bailey's clinic is only 10 minutes from here," she said, already pulling out her phone. "I'll call ahead and let her know we're coming." As they quickly gathered their things, Oliver refused to be separated from the puppy. He stood as close as his parents would allow, his eyes wide with concern and fascination. When Michael gently wrapped the puppy in a clean towel from their picnic supplies, Oliver reached out to touch its nose with one careful finger. The puppy, as if responding to the child's touch, briefly opened its eyes. Dark, frightened eyes that seemed too knowing for such a young creature. It was a moment that Eleanor would later describe as something passing between them, something old and yet completely new. No one in Riverdale could have predicted how this chance discovery would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the banks of the Sycamore River, bringing together strangers who would become friends, and uncovering secrets that had long been hidden beneath the surface of their peaceful town. Dr. Melissa Bailey's veterinary clinic was normally closed on Sunday mornings, but when Sarah called explaining the emergency, she didn't hesitate. By the time the Parkers arrived with Ray Thompson and their unusual find, the veterinarian was waiting at the entrance, the examination room already prepared. "Bring it straight back," Dr. Bailey instructed, her professional demeanor barely concealing her concern as she caught sight of the small bundle in Michael's arms. At 42, Melissa Bailey had been Riverdale's only veterinarian for 15 years. And while she had seen her share of abandoned animals, something about this case immediately struck her as different. The examination room was bright and clinical, but Dr. Bailey had always made efforts to keep it from feeling sterile. Colorful paintings of animals lined the walls, many created by her younger patients during recovery periods, and soft music played from hidden speakers. Today, however, no one noticed these comforting touches as all attention focused on the trembling puppy. "Let's see what we have here," Dr. Bailey murmured as she gently unwrapped the towel. The puppy lay still, eyes half closed, its breathing shallow but steady. Its coat, though wet and matted, showed the distinctive markings of a purebred German shepherd. "Is it going to be okay?" Oliver asked in his small voice, pressing against his mother's legs as he tried to maintain visual contact with the puppy. It was one of his longest and clearest sentences yet, a fact that would have normally elicited excited glances between his parents. Today, however, they were too preoccupied with the situation at hand. "Doctor." Bailey gave the child a reassuring smile before returning to her examination. "I'm going to do everything I can to help this little guy," she promised. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking vital signs, examining for injuries, assessing the level of dehydration, moderate malnutrition, severe dehydration, and mild hypothermia, she reported after a few minutes. But surprisingly, no major injuries. Whoever put this puppy in that bag either didn't want to hurt it physically or didn't know what they were doing. She paused, frowning slightly as she examined the puppy's left hind leg. "That's interesting." "What is it?" Sarah asked, still holding Oliver, who refused to be taken to the waiting room despite her gentle suggestions. "There's a small tattoo here, on the inner thigh," Dr. Bailey explained, pointing to a tiny mark that was barely visible through the fur. "It's a registration code. This puppy comes from a licensed breeder or a training facility." The revelation shifted the atmosphere in the room. What had seemed like a case of casual cruelty suddenly took on new dimensions. "Can you trace it?" Ray asked, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived at the clinic. He stood near the door, his clothes still damp from the river, his weathered face a mask of controlled anger. Dr. Bailey nodded. "We can access the National Registry. Give me a few minutes to stabilize this little one, and then we'll see what we can find out." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The puppy was placed on a warming pad, given fluids through an IV, and treated for its immediate symptoms. Oliver watched every procedure with solemn attention, only occasionally asking quiet questions that Sarah answered as best she could. Eleanor sat in a chair in the corner, her hands busy with knitting needles she had produced from her seemingly bottomless purse, her way of managing stress, as the family well knew. Michael stepped outside to call his boss at the local newspaper where he worked as a staff photographer, explaining that he wouldn't be available for the afternoon assignment. Instead of the reprimand he expected, his editor, Jessica Thornton, was intrigued by the story. This could be something worth covering. "Mike," she said over the phone, "a toddler spotting a puppy in trouble, a community rescue. Do you have any pictures?" Michael hadn't thought to take photos during the rescue, but Jennifer Woods approached him as he ended the call, offering to share the video she had captured on her phone. "I got the whole thing," she explained. "From Mr. Thompson going into the water to your son's reaction when they found the puppy. It's pretty powerful stuff." By early afternoon, Jennifer's video had been uploaded to the Riverdale Gazette's website with a brief article Michael had hastily written between updates from Dr. Bailey. The story might have remained a local curiosity if not for what happened next. Dr. Bailey emerged from her office with a printout in hand and a troubled expression on her face. "I found a match for the registration code," she announced to the small group gathered in her waiting room. "The puppy belongs to Blue Ridge Kennels, a breeding and training facility about 30 miles from here. They specialize in working dogs, police K9s, search and rescue, service animals." She paused, glancing down at the paper. "According to the registry, this puppy is from a litter of 4, all reported missing 3 weeks ago. The breeder filed a report claiming they were stolen overnight. The implications settled over the room like a heavy cloud." Eleanor was the first to speak, voicing what everyone was thinking. "So there are 3 more puppies out there somewhere?" Dr. Bailey nodded. "I've already called the contact number listed in the registry. The owner, a Mr. Harrison, is on his way here now." While they waited, the puppy's condition continued to improve. Dr. Bailey allowed Oliver to sit on a stool near the examination table where the puppy now rested, wrapped in warm blankets. The child's presence seemed to have a calming effect on the animal, who would occasionally open its eyes and attempt to lift its head when Oliver spoke to it. "Hello, puppy," Oliver would whisper, his small hand hovering just above the blanket, not quite touching but close enough to be sensed. "You're safe now." It was in this tableau, a small boy keeping vigil over a recovering puppy, that Andrew Harrison found them when he arrived at the clinic nearly an hour later. A tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the sturdy build of someone who worked outdoors, Harrison stood in the doorway of the examination room for a long moment before announcing his presence. "That's one of mine," he said quietly, his voice carrying a mix of relief and something harder to define. "That's Ranger's pup, from his last litter before retirement." All eyes turned to the newcomer. Dr. Bailey stepped forward, extending her hand. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Dr. Bailey. We spoke on the phone." Harrison nodded, shaking her hand briefly before moving closer to examine the puppy. His eyes were expert, assessing the animal's condition with a glance. "Male. The runt of the litter," he confirmed. "We called him Scout." "Scout," Oliver repeated softly, testing the name. The puppy's ears twitched slightly in response. Harrison looked at the child with surprise, then at the adults. "Your boy found him," Sarah stepped forward. "Yes, this morning at Sycamore Park, he spotted the bag in the river." A complex expression crossed Harrison's face, gratitude mingled with what might have been embarrassment. "The pups were scheduled for preliminary training evaluation," he explained. "They're from one of our best bloodlines, worth a considerable amount, especially with the right training." "Do you have any idea who might have taken them?" Michael asked, his journalist's instincts awakening. Harrison hesitated. "We've had some issues recently. A former employee who left under difficult circumstances. But nothing I can prove." He turned his attention back to the puppy. "May I?" At Dr. Bailey's nod, he gently lifted the blanket to examine the puppy more thoroughly. His hands were large, but moved with the confidence of someone who had handled countless animals. "He's going to need special care for a while," he said finally, "but he'll recover." "And the other puppies?" Eleanor asked from her corner. "Any sign of them?" Harrison's expression darkened. "Nothing. Not a trace. Police have been looking, but—" He shrugged, a gesture that conveyed both frustration and resignation. It was Ray Thompson who broke the uncomfortable silence that followed. "Well, now we know what we're looking for," he said, pushing himself away from the wall he'd been leaning against. 3 more pups like this one, probably somewhere in the area. If they were just thrown away, someone might have found them already. Or they might still be out there, Sarah added, her voice tight with emotion as she glanced at the puppy, thinking of its siblings potentially suffering the same fate, or worse. Andrew Harrison looked around at the assembled group. The family who had rescued one of his puppies, the river guide who had waded into the water without hesitation, the veterinarian who had opened her clinic on a Sunday. Strangers united by an unexpected discovery and a spontaneous act of compassion. "I've offered a reward for information," he said after a moment, "but maybe what we need is more people looking." Michael's phone chimed with a notification. Glancing at the screen, his eyebrows rose in surprise. "Well, we might be getting that," he said, turning the phone to show the others. "Jennifer's video has gone viral. The Gazette's website has crashed from traffic, and it's being picked up by news sites across the state." As if to confirm his words, Dr. Bailey's clinic phone began to ring. The first of what would become a flood of calls from concerned citizens, media outlets, and animal lovers across Vermont and beyond. Meanwhile, oblivious to the growing attention, Oliver had dozed off, his head resting on the edge of the examination table. Beside him, equally exhausted, Scout the puppy had fallen into a deep, healing sleep. Their breathing had synchronized, rising and falling in perfect unison, as if they were already connected by something stronger than the circumstances of their meeting. Eleanor watched them with knowing eyes. "Those two," she murmured to Sarah, nodding toward the sleeping pair. "They've found each other now. Mark my words, this story is just beginning." By Monday morning, the story of Oliver Parker and Scout the puppy had spread far beyond the boundaries of Riverdale. Regional news stations had picked up Jennifer's video, and Shire River Puppy was trending on several social media platforms. The Riverdale Gazette's website was back online after emergency server upgrades, and Michael found himself juggling his regular photography duties with impromptu interviews about his son's discovery. "It's surreal," he admitted to Jessica Thornton as they reviewed the latest article about the rescue. "Yesterday we were just having our regular Sunday picnic, and today I'm getting calls from news outlets in Boston and New York." Jessica smiled, her journalist's instincts recognizing the perfect human interest story when she saw one. At 55, she had been running the Gazette for nearly 2 decades, and had developed an unerring sense for which local stories had legs. "This one checks all the boxes, Mike," she explained. "Adorable kid, rescued puppy, mystery, community coming together. It's catnip for readers." Meanwhile, at the Bailey Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Bailey had converted a recovery kennel into a temporary nursery for Scout. The puppy was responding well to treatment, already showing signs of the resilient spirit common to his breed. She had agreed to keep him under observation for at least another day, although his condition no longer required round-the-clock medical attention. "It's as much for crowd control as for medical reasons," she confessed to Sarah when the Parkers arrived for a visit that afternoon. "Ever since the story broke, we've had a steady stream of visitors wanting to see the miracle puppy. This way, we can manage the situation better." Oliver, oblivious to the commotion his discovery had caused, was focused entirely on reuniting with Scout. He had been asking about the puppy since waking that morning, and no amount of explanation about the doggy needing rest could fully satisfy him. Now, as Dr. Bailey led the family to the recovery area, he practically vibrated with excitement. Scout recognized Oliver immediately. Despite his still weakened state, the puppy's tail began to wag furiously, and he made valiant attempts to stand in his enclosure. Dr. Bailey opened the door, and Oliver sat cross-legged on the floor while Scout was gently placed in his lap. The reunion was captured by Sarah on her phone, another moment that would soon join the growing collection of images documenting this unexpected journey. "It's like they've known each other forever," Eleanor observed, watching as Oliver carefully stroked Scout's ears with an attention span unusual for his age. "Animals can sense special connections," Dr. Bailey replied. "And this little guy certainly knows who saved him." The clinic's front bell chimed, signaling another visitor. Dr. Bailey excused herself, returning moments later with Andrew Harrison and a woman none of them had met before. "Sorry to interrupt," Harrison said, nodding a greeting to the Parkers. "This is Detective Diana Chen from the Riverdale Police Department. She's been assigned to investigate the case of the missing puppies." Detective Chen was in her late 30s, with an athletic build and the alert posture of someone who noticed everything. She wore plain clothes, dark jeans and a blazer over a simple blouse, but the badge clipped to her belt left no doubt about her profession. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker," she acknowledged with a nod, "and you must be Oliver." She crouched down to the child's level, offering a warm smile that transformed her professional demeanor. "I've heard you're quite the hero." Oliver looked up briefly from Scout, but seemed unimpressed with this new title. His attention quickly returned to the puppy in his lap, who was now attempting to lick his face. "He's always been observant," Sarah explained, a hint of pride in her voice. "Even as a baby, he noticed things others missed." Detective Chen straightened, taking out a small notebook. "I'd like to get a complete statement from everyone who was present at the rescue," she said. "The department is taking this case seriously, with the media attention it's receiving. We want to make sure we're doing our due diligence." As the adults moved to a more private area to speak with the detective, Eleanor stayed behind with Oliver and Scout, settling into a chair with her ever-present knitting. Through the window of the recovery room, she could see a small gathering of people outside the clinic, some with cameras, others simply curious onlookers drawn by the story that had captured so many hearts. "You've stirred up quite a commotion." "And young man," she murmured to her grandson, who paid no attention as he continued his gentle ministrations to Scout. Inside Dr. Bailey's office, Detective Chen was building a timeline of events with methodical precision. "So the puppy was found around 9:30 yesterday morning," she confirmed, making notes. "And you're certain the bag was deliberately tied shut?" "No doubt about it," Ray Thompson answered. He had been called in to join the meeting, along with Jennifer Woods, whose video evidence was now considered potentially important to the investigation. That wasn't accidental, or something that just happened to drift downstream. Someone meant for that bag to go unnoticed. Chen nodded, her expression revealing nothing. "Mr. Harrison, could you tell us more about the circumstances of the puppy's disappearance? Your initial report stated they were taken from your kennels 3 weeks ago. Correct?" Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Yes, that's right. Sometime during the night of April 28th, the security system had been disabled, not tampered with, but turned off using the correct code. That's why I suspected it might be an inside job." "And you mentioned a former employee yesterday," Michael prompted. Harrison hesitated, glancing at Detective Chen, who nodded for him to continue. "Jason Mercer," he said finally. "He worked for me for about 3 years as a handler and trainer, good with the dogs, but increasingly unreliable. He started missing shifts, showing up late. I had to let him go about a month before the puppies disappeared." "Did he leave on bad terms?" Chen asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "You could say that," Harrison admitted. "He felt the dismissal was unfair, claimed I was blaming him for problems that weren't his fault. Made some threats on his way out. Nothing specific, just the usual, 'you'll regret this' type of talk." "Have you spoken with him since the puppies went missing?" Harrison shook his head. I tried calling when I discovered the theft, but his number was disconnected. Went by his apartment too, but the landlord said he'd moved out the week before. No forwarding address. Detective Chen made another note. We'll look into Mr. Mercer's whereabouts, she assured them. But for now, I'm more concerned about the other 3 puppies. Mr. Harrison, in your professional opinion, could they still be alive after 3 weeks? The question hung heavy in the air. Harrison took a moment before answering, his expertise at war with his hope. If they've been properly fed and sheltered, yes, he said finally. They're from hardy stock, bred for resilience. But if they've been neglected or, he trailed off, unwilling to voice the worst possibilities, let's work with the assumption that they're alive, Chen said firmly. Scout's survival suggests that whoever took them wasn't interested in harming them directly. But why separate them? Sarah wondered aloud. And why put Scout in the river? If someone stole valuable puppies, wouldn't they want to keep them all? It was Jennifer who offered a theory. Oh, what if they panicked? All this media attention around a stolen litter of valuable puppies might make someone nervous about getting caught with them. Detective Chen pointed her pen at Jennifer. That's exactly what I'm thinking. The publicity might pressure whoever has the other puppies, whether it's this Jason Mercer or someone else, into making a mistake. Or it might prompt people who have seen something suspicious to come forward. As if on cue, Dr. Bailey's assistant knocked on the office door. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but there's a call on line 1, someone saying they might have information about another puppy. The atmosphere in the room immediately shifted from speculative to urgent. Detective Chen nodded to Dr. Bailey, who picked up the phone and put it on speaker. This is Dr. Bailey, she said. I understand you have information about a puppy. The voice that came through was hesitant. A female D and young, perhaps a teenager. I saw the news about the puppy in the river, she began. And, about a week ago, my little brother and I found a puppy behind the old Westridge Mall. It looks just like the one on TV. We've been keeping it in our garage because our mum is allergic, but we didn't know what else to do. The adults exchanged glances. Westridge Mall was an abandoned shopping centre on the outskirts of the neighbouring town of Millfield, about 20 miles from Riverdale. It had been closed for years, its vast parking lot and empty storefronts occasionally used by teenagers as a hangout spot away from adult supervision. What's your name, honey? Dr. Bailey asked gently. Lily, the girl answered. Lily Ramirez. Lily, you've done a wonderful thing taking care of this puppy, Dr. Bailey continued. Is it a German Shepherd? About 8 weeks old? Yes, Lily confirmed. And it was really skinny when we found it, but we've been feeding it puppy food from the store. It's doing better now. Detective Chen leaned forward. Lily, this is Detective Chen with the Riverdale Police. You're not in any trouble. In fact, you're being very helpful. Would it be possible for us to come see the puppy? We believe it might be from the same litter as the one that was found yesterday. There was a pause on the line. I guess so, Lily said finally. But I don't want to get in trouble with my mum. She doesn't know we've been keeping it. We'll handle that, Chen assured her. Can you text this number with your address? She recited the clinic's phone number. After getting Lily's agreement and ending the call, the room erupted into cautious excitement. If it's one of Scout's litter mates, Harrison began, hope evident in his voice. And then we're one step closer to finding all of them. Detective Chen finished for him. She stood, already shifting into action mode. Mr. Harrison, I'd like you to accompany me to identify the puppy. Dr. Bailey, would you be willing to come as well, in case it needs medical attention? Both agreed immediately. Sarah looked at Michael, a silent communication passing between them. We want to help too, she said. If this puppy is like Scout, Oliver might have a similar connection with it. That could be beneficial, right? Detective Chen considered this. Under normal circumstances, bringing civilians, especially a toddler, along on police business would be out of the question. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the Parkers had already proven themselves to be integral to the unfolding story. "All right," she conceded, "but you follow my lead, and Oliver stays with you at all times." As they prepared to leave, Eleanor approached Sarah. "I think I'll stay here with Scout," she said. "The poor thing seems to get anxious when everyone leaves at once, and someone should be here in case there are any more calls." The arrangement settled, the unusual search party set off for Millfield, each member driven by a mixture of hope and apprehension about what they might find. In the back seat of the Parkers' SUV, Oliver sat quietly in his car seat, unaware of the significance of their journey, but somehow sensing its importance. He clutched a small stuffed dog, a stand-in for Scout, that Dr. Bailey had given him before they left. "Find more puppies?" he asked as they drove through the countryside between Riverdale and Millfield. Sarah turned in her seat to smile at him. "That's right, sweetheart. We're going to find Scout's brothers and sisters." Oliver nodded solemnly, accepting this mission with the simple clarity of a child's understanding. "Scout will be happy," he declared with certainty. From the driver's seat, Michael caught Sarah's eye, sharing a moment of parental wonder at their son's intuitive grasp of the situation. Whatever lay ahead at the abandoned mall, they were now fully committed to seeing this unexpected adventure through to its conclusion. The Westridge Mall stood like a monument to faded prosperity. Its vast parking lot, cracked and sprouting weeds, the once gleaming storefronts now covered with plywood and graffiti. Nature was slowly reclaiming the space. Small trees pushed through the asphalt, and vines crept up the concrete walls. In its prime, it had been the commercial heart of Millfield, but the rise of online shopping and a recession had delivered a 1-2 punch from which it never recovered. Detective Chen's unmarked police car led the way, followed by the Parkers' SUV and Dr. Bailey's practical hatchback with Andrew Harrison in the passenger seat. They pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, where a single other vehicle was parked, an older model sedan that had seen better days. Standing beside it was a teenage girl with long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, nervously shifting her weight from foot to foot. Next to her was a boy of about 8, holding what appeared to be a pet carrier. "That must be Lily and her brother," Sarah said as they parked nearby. Detective Chen approached the teenagers first, her posture deliberately casual to put them at ease. The others followed at a respectful distance, with Michael carrying Oliver. "Lily, I'm Detective Chen. We spoke on the phone. Thank you for contacting us." The girl nodded, her eyes darting between the adults with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "This is my brother, Marco," she said. "And this is the puppy we found." She gestured to the carrier, from which soft whining sounds could be heard. Dr. Bailey stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Bailey, the veterinarian who's been treating the other puppy. Would it be okay if I take a look at this little one?" Marco looked to his sister for approval before carefully setting the carrier on the ground and opening its door. Inside, a German Shepherd puppy cowered at the back. Visibly frightened by the strange surroundings and unfamiliar faces, Andrew Harrison knelt beside the carrier, making a soft clicking sound with his tongue that immediately captured the puppy's attention. "Come here, little one," he coaxed gently. "That's it, that's a good pup." Slowly, the puppy inched forward, sniffing cautiously at Harrison's extended hand. "Female," he noted, "and yes, definitely from Scout's litter. This is Shadow. See the darker markings around her eyes." Oliver, who had been watching intently from his father's arms, began to squirm. "Down, Daddy," he insisted. "See, puppy." Michael hesitated, looking to Sarah and then Detective Chen for guidance. Chen nodded. "Just keep him close." Carefully, Michael set Oliver on his feet but kept a hand on his shoulder. To everyone's surprise, Oliver didn't immediately approach the carrier. Instead, He sat down on the asphalt a few feet away and waited patiently. Dr. Bailey, who had been observing both the puppy and the child, smiled in understanding. "He's making himself less threatening," she explained in a low voice, "either instinctively or from his experience with Scout." The strategy worked. After another minute of Harrison's gentle encouragement, Shadow ventured completely out of the carrier. Her eyes locked onto Oliver. And something in her posture changed, a subtle relaxation, as if recognizing something familiar in the small human. "Well, I'll be," Harrison murmured, as Shadow cautiously approached Oliver and sniffed his extended hand. "Lily, can you tell us exactly where you found her?" Detective Chen asked, allowing the canine human introduction to continue while she gathered information. Lily pointed toward the back of the mall. "Over there, behind the old food court entrance. Marco and I come here sometimes to explore. We know we're not supposed to," she added quickly, "but lots of kids do. We heard whimpering, and at first we thought it might be a cat, but then we found her hiding under some broken pallets." "Was there any sign of the other puppies?" Harrison asked, his attention divided between Shadow's assessment and the possibility of locating the remaining two. Marco shook his head. "Just this one. She was really scared and hungry." "You did a great job taking care of her," Dr. Bailey assured them, examining Shadow without disturbing her interaction with Oliver. "She's underweight, but doesn't seem to have any serious health issues. You've been feeding her properly." Lily nodded proudly. "I researched online about what puppies need. We used our allowance to buy puppy food and some supplies." "Can you show us exactly where you found her?" Detective Chen asked. "There might be clues about the other puppies." While Michael stayed with Oliver and Shadow, who were now completely comfortable with each other, the others followed Lily and Marco around the perimeter of the abandoned mall. The rear service area was littered with debris, old shipping pallets, discarded packaging, and the occasional shopping cart. "It was right here," Marco said, pointing to a sheltered area between the building and a large dumpster. "She was hiding underneath these boards." Detective Chen surveyed the area with a professional eye, then pulled on a pair of latex gloves from her pocket and began carefully moving some of the debris. "Someone was staying here," she observed, pointing to the remains of a makeshift camp, a flattened cardboard bed, empty food containers, and a discarded blanket. "Could it have been Jason Mercer?" Sarah wondered aloud. Harrison frowned, examining the site. "Possibly. He didn't have many resources after I fired him, but why bring the puppies here, of all places?" "Isolation," Detective Chen suggested. "No security cameras, minimal traffic, plenty of hiding places. If you're trying to keep valuable puppies until they can be sold or moved elsewhere, this isn't a bad temporary location." Dr. Bailey picked up a torn paper bag with a familiar logo. "This is from Pet Palace in Millfield," she noted. "It's a pet supply store about 2 miles from here." Chen bagged the item as potential evidence. "Good catch, Doctor. That gives us another lead to follow. If someone was buying supplies for the puppies, they might have been caught on the store's security cameras." As they continued to search the area, Lily's phone chimed with a message. Her expression fell as she read it. "It's my mom," she said. "She's wondering where we are. We told her we were going to the library." Detective Chen nodded, understanding. "We should get you two home. You've been incredibly helpful, and I promise you're not in any trouble. In fact, we'd like to make sure you're recognized for what you've done." "What will happen to Shadow now?" Marco asked, concern evident in his young face. "She'll need to be checked thoroughly by Dr. Bailey," Harrison explained gently. "And then, well, she's still technically my puppy. But," he added, seeing the children's disappointed expressions, "I think we can work something out for visitation rights, don't you?" The children's faces brightened. As they returned to the parking lot, they found Michael sitting on the ground with Oliver in his lap and Shadow now confidently exploring the immediate area, always returning to check in with the humans as if making sure they were still there. "She's definitely one of mine," Harrison confirmed to Detective Chen. "That pattern of checking in, it's a trait we specifically breed for in our working lines. These puppies were meant to be service or therapy dogs, not just pets." The realization seemed to add another layer of urgency to their mission. These weren't just any puppies. They were specially bred animals with the potential to make significant differences in people's lives. As Dr. Bailey prepared to take Shadow back to her clinic, Detective Chen arranged for an officer to drive Lily and Marco home and speak with their mother. "I'll explain everything," she assured them. "And I'll make sure she knows what heroes you both are." With the children safely on their way home and Shadow securely in Dr. Bailey's care, the focus returned to the two puppies still missing. "I want to check out that pet store before it closes," Chen announced. "If someone bought supplies there, the staff might remember something." "I'd like to come along," Harrison said. "I can show them photos of Jason Mercer. See if anyone recognizes him." As they discussed the next steps, Michael's phone rang. It was Eleanor, calling from the veterinary clinic. "Michael!" Her voice was tight with excitement. "You need to get back here. A man just called the clinic. Says he has information about the other puppies, but will only speak to the family who found Scout. He seemed nervous, kept saying he needed to make things right." Michael relayed the information to the others. Detective Chen immediately took charge. "Did he leave a name or number?" "No," Eleanor replied when Michael asked, "but he said he'd call back in an hour, said he'd seen the news and couldn't keep quiet anymore." The group quickly reorganized their plan. Detective Chen would go to the pet store with Harrison, while the Parkers returned to the clinic with Dr. Bailey and Shadow to await the mysterious caller. The drive back to Riverdale was filled with speculation. "Do you think it's Jason Mercer?" Sarah asked from the back seat, where she sat next to Oliver's car seat. "Maybe," Michael replied, eyes on the road. "Or it could be someone else involved. Either way, it sounds like someone's conscience is bothering them." Dr. Bailey, following in her car with Shadow, called Michael's phone, which was connected to the car's speaker system. "I've been thinking," her voice came through. "Dee, if this caller is involved with the puppy's disappearance, we need to be careful not to scare them off. They might be worried about legal consequences." "Good point," Michael agreed. "What do you suggest? When they call back, focus on the puppy's welfare, not on blame or punishment. Make it clear that your priority is finding the remaining puppies safe and sound." By the time they arrived back at the clinic, they had formulated a basic approach for the expected call. Eleanor greeted them at the door, Scout wriggling excitedly in her arms. "He's been restless ever since you left," she explained, setting the puppy down as Oliver entered. The reunion between child and puppy was immediate and joyful, with Scout licking Oliver's face while the toddler giggled uncontrollably. When Dr. Bailey brought Shadow in, Scout's reaction was even more dramatic. The puppies recognized each other instantly, emitting high-pitched whines of excitement as they circled and sniffed each other, their tails wagging so hard their entire bodies shook. "Siblings?" Dr. Bailey confirmed with a smile. "That greeting is unmistakable." The next 45 minutes passed slowly as they waited for the promised call. Oliver sat on the floor of the recovery room, completely content with the two puppies who had apparently accepted him as part of their pack. Shadow was more reserved than Scout, but seemed to take cues from her brother, gradually warming to the small human who spoke to them in soft, simple words. Michael used the time to upload photos of Shadow's rescue to the Gazette's website, along with a brief update on the developing story. Within minutes, comments and shares began flooding in. The community's investment in the puppies, fate only growing stronger with each new development. At precisely the 1-hour mark, the clinic's phone rang. Dr. Bailey answered, then quickly motioned for Michael to pick up the extension in her office. "This is Michael Parker," he said, his heart racing despite his outwardly calm demeanor. There was a pause before a male voice responded. "You're the father? The one whose kid found the puppy in the river?" "Yes." "And that's right. My son Oliver found Scout yesterday morning, and we've just found Shadow today." Another pause. "So that's two of them safe?" "Yes," Michael confirmed, following the agreed-upon approach. "We're very concerned about the other two. They must be frightened and hungry by now." "They're okay," the voice said quickly. "I've been feeding them. They're not hurt or anything." Michael exhaled in relief, catching Sarah's eye as she stood beside him. "That's good to hear. My son would be very happy to know they're being cared for. Could you tell us where they are so we can bring them to the veterinarian? Dr. Bailey has been taking excellent care of Scout and Shadow." The caller seemed to hesitate. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said finally. "It wasn't supposed to go this way. I just wanted to teach Harrison a lesson, you know. Show him he couldn't treat people like that." "I understand," Michael said carefully, though he didn't completely. "Sometimes situations spiral out of our control. But you're doing the right thing now by reaching out. Your kid," the voice continued, changing direction, "the one in the video, he really cares about these puppies, huh?" "Oliver has a special connection with them," Michael confirmed. "He's been worried about Scout's brothers and sisters." The line went quiet for so long that Michael feared they'd lost the connection. Finally, the voice returned, now with a note of resolution. "The old Greenfield farm, off Route 17. There's a barn behind the main house. They're in a pen in the corner, the door's not locked." Before Michael could respond further, the line went dead. He looked up at Sarah, Dr. Bailey, and Eleanor, who had been listening to his side of the conversation intently. "We need to call Detective Chen," Sarah said immediately, already pulling out her phone. "And we need to get to that farm," Dr. Bailey added. "If those puppies have been there for 3 weeks, they may need immediate medical attention." As Sarah spoke with Detective Chen, who promised to meet them at the farm with backup, Michael went to the recovery room where Oliver was still happily engaged with the puppies. "Hey, buddy," he said, crouching down to his son's level. "Would you like to go on another adventure to find the rest of Scout's family?" Oliver looked up, his expression serious as he seemed to consider the question. Then he nodded firmly, one hand on Scout's head and the other on Shadow's. "Find all puppies," he stated, with the absolute certainty that only a child can muster. Looking at his son, surrounded by the puppies he had helped save, Michael felt a surge of emotion that caught him by surprise. What had begun as a routine Sunday morning had evolved into something much more significant, not just a rescue mission, but a reminder of how unexpected connections could form, how compassion could spread, and how sometimes the purest insights came from the youngest hearts. With renewed determination, he helped Oliver to his feet. "Let's go find the rest of the puppy family," he said, taking his son's small hand in his own. "They're waiting for us." Greenfield Farm sat abandoned on 20 acres of overgrown fields, a relic of Vermont's agricultural past. The once proud farmhouse had fallen into disrepair, its white paint peeling and shutters hanging askew. Behind it, a weathered red barn leaned slightly to one side, its roof patched in places with mismatched materials. The property had been on the market for years, its asking price dropping steadily as nature reclaimed more of the cultivated land. Detective Chen's cruiser was already parked in the gravel driveway when the Parkers arrived, followed closely by Dr. Bailey's car. Another police vehicle was positioned near the barn, its officers establishing a perimeter around the property. I've done a preliminary sweep," Chen informed them as they gathered near the vehicles. "No sign of anyone on the premises, but we've definitely got evidence of recent occupation in the barn. I've called for animal control backup, but they're handling another situation and won't be here for at least an hour." Dr. Bailey nodded, already gathering her medical kit from her car. "If the puppies are here and need immediate care, we shouldn't wait." Detective Chen agreed, but held up a cautionary hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, I have to insist that Oliver stays in the car with one of you until we've secured the scene." Sarah immediately volunteered to stay behind with Oliver, who protested briefly but was mollified by a special mission to keep Scout and Shadow calm in their traveling crates. The puppies had come along for the journey, as Dr. Bailey thought having the scent of their litter mates might help calm any frightened puppies they found. "We'll be right back," Michael promised, kissing his son's forehead before following Detective Chen, Dr. Bailey, and Eleanor toward the barn. The enormous wooden doors creaked as they slid open, revealing a cavernous interior dappled with dusty beams of late afternoon sunlight that streamed through gaps in the roof. The air inside was heavy with the scents of hay, old wood, and animals. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as they moved deeper into the space. "Over there," Chen pointed to the far corner where a makeshift living area had been set up. A sleeping bag, a camping lantern, and various supplies scattered around. Beside this area was what they had come for, a large pen constructed from old gates and wire containing 2 German shepherd puppies. Unlike Scout and Shadow when they were found, these puppies appeared to be in relatively good condition. Alert, active, and not visibly malnourished. They began barking excitedly as the group approached. Nova and Titan. Harrison identified them immediately, his voice thick with emotion. The female with the white patch on her chest is Nova, and the male with the broader head is Titan. They're alive. All 4 made it. Dr. Bailey moved to the pen, assessing the puppies with a professional eye. "They look surprisingly well cared for," she noted, checking their water and food dishes, which were clean and recently filled. Whoever had them here was at least meeting their basic needs. While Dr. Bailey examined the puppies, Detective Chen surveyed the surrounding area, her trained eye catching details the others might miss. "Our anonymous caller was prepared for a longer stay," she observed, pointing to a stack of canned food, bottled water, and a small propane stove. "And look here," she added, retrieving a notebook from beneath the sleeping bag. She flipped it open, revealing pages of handwritten notes, feeding schedules for the puppies, observations about their behavior, even crude sketches of their growth progress. This wasn't a simple act of revenge, she mused. There was genuine care involved. Eleanor, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Maybe that's why he called. He couldn't continue caring for them, but he couldn't abandon them either. Michael, who had been documenting the scene with his camera, paused and lowered the device. "It's Jason Mercer, isn't it? The former employee?" Detective Chen nodded. "Almost certainly. There's a pay stub with his name in that backpack. We'll process everything as evidence, but it seems clear he was living here with the puppies." "But why?" Harrison asked. His initial relief at finding the puppies now giving way to confusion. Why take them only to care for them and then give them back? If he wanted to hurt my business, he could have sold them or... He trailed off, unwilling to voice darker possibilities. Eleanor stepped closer to the pen, watching as Dr. Bailey continued her examination of the puppies. "Maybe it wasn't about hurting your business at all," she suggested. "No, maybe it was about the puppies themselves." Before anyone could respond to this theory, Sarah appeared at the barn entrance, holding Oliver's hand. "He was getting too upset being left behind," she explained apologetically. "And honestly, so was I. Did you find them?" Oliver didn't wait for an answer. He spotted the pen and pulled away from his mother, running toward it with the single-minded determination of a toddler on a mission. "Would more puppies," he exclaimed, his face lighting up with joy. Dr. Bailey smiled and lifted him so he could see into the pen. "That's right, Oliver. This is Nova and Titan. They're Scout and Shadow's brother and sister." Oliver studied the puppies solemnly, then looked back at the adults. "They okay?" "Yes, sweetheart," Dr. Bailey assured him. "They're okay. Just a bit confused and scared because they don't know us yet." With Dr. Bailey's help, Oliver was allowed to sit beside the pen while the puppies cautiously approached him, sniffing his fingers through the wire. Just as with Scout and Shadow, there seemed to be an instant connection, something in Oliver's gentle, accepting presence that the animals responded to instinctively. While Oliver bonded with the puppies, Detective Chen continued processing the scene, collecting evidence and taking photographs. Harrison assisted Dr. Bailey in preparing the puppies for transport, and Michael helped gather the supplies that had been used for their care. Sarah moved to stand beside Eleanor, who was leafing through a stack of papers she had found on a makeshift table. "What are those?" Sarah asked. "Research," Eleanor replied, a note of surprise in her voice. "Articles about service dogs, therapy animals, training methods. It seems our puppy napper was studying quite extensively." Sarah took one of the papers, scanning its contents. "Canine companions for children with special needs," she read aloud. "Why would he be researching this?" Detective Chen overheard and joined them, taking the papers to include with her evidence collection. "This might help explain his motivation," she said thoughtfully. "We'll need to find Mercer to get the full story. But this suggests something more complex than simple revenge." As they continued gathering the puppies and supplies, a new vehicle pulled into the farm's driveway, Andrew Harrison's truck. Harrison had called his assistant to bring transportation more suitable for all 4 puppies. With the assistant's help, they created comfortable traveling arrangements for Nova and Titan in specialized crates. "They'll need full veterinary workups," Dr. Bailey instructed as they loaded the crates. "But preliminarily, they appear to be in good health, better than I would have expected after 3 weeks away from their mother." Harrison nodded, his expression a complex mixture of relief, confusion, and residual anger. "I still don't understand why Jason would do this. These puppies represent thousands of dollars of investment and years of careful breeding. Sometimes it's not about the money," Eleanor said quietly, watching as Oliver said a reluctant goodbye to the newfound puppies. "Sometimes it's about connection." As they prepared to leave the farm, Detective Chen received a call that made her step away from the group. When she returned, her expression was carefully neutral. "That was the station," she informed them. Jason Mercer just walked in and turned himself in. He's asking to speak with Mr. Harrison and, surprisingly, with the Parker family." The news sent a ripple of surprise through the group. "Why would he want to talk to us?" Sarah asked, instinctively drawing Oliver closer to her side. "He didn't say specifically," Chen replied, "but he was clear that he wanted to explain his actions to the people involved. Especially, and these are his words, the little boy who understands." Michael and Sarah exchanged glances, a silent marital communication passing between them. It was Michael who spoke. "If it helps bring closure to this situation, we're willing to hear what he has to say. We'll need to process him first," Chen explained, "but if you're comfortable with it, I can arrange a meeting at the station later this evening." With the decision made, they began the journey back to Riverdale. Harrison and his assistant with Nova and Titan, Dr. Bailey with Scout and Shadow, and the Parkers following in their own vehicle with Detective Chen leading the way. In the back seat, Oliver was unusually quiet, his small face serious as he watched the landscape pass by outside his window. "All puppies safe," he said finally, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "Yes, honey," Sarah confirmed. Reaching back to touch his knee, "All the puppies are safe now." Oliver nodded, seemingly satisfied with this resolution. "Good," he said simply. Then, after a thoughtful pause, "The sad man too." Sarah glanced at Michael, both of them taken aback by their son's perceptiveness. "What sad man, Oliver?" Michael asked carefully. "The one who had the puppies," Oliver replied, as if it should be obvious. "He was sad. Puppies make him better." The simplicity and insight of the statement left both parents momentarily speechless. From the beginning, Oliver had demonstrated an uncanny ability to see what others missed. First, the puppy in the river, and now this intuitive understanding of a stranger's emotional state. "You know," Eleanor said from the front passenger seat, her voice gentle with wonder, "and out of the mouths of babes often come the most profound truths." As they drove toward what they hoped would be answers, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road ahead. The story that had begun with a chance discovery on a Sunday morning was approaching its resolution. But as with all meaningful journeys, the real significance lay not in the destination, but in the connections forged along the way. At the Riverdale police station, Jason Mercer sat in an interview room, waiting to tell his story. His appearance, thin, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes, spoke of weeks of stress and inadequate self-care. Yet there was also a certain calmness about him now, as if the weight of secrecy had finally been lifted. When Detective Chen informed him that all 4 puppies had been recovered safely and were receiving veterinary care, his shoulders visibly relaxed. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for any of them to get hurt." "Then perhaps you can explain why you took them in the first place," Chen suggested, setting a recorder on the table between them. Mercer nodded, took a deep breath, and began to speak. His story would prove to be not one of malice or greed, but of love, loss, and a desperate attempt to heal a wound that had seemed beyond repair. And at its heart was a connection to animals that the adults might never have understood without the help of a perceptive toddler who, even at 20 months old, recognized the healing power of unconditional love. Outside the interview room, the Parkers and Andrew Harrison waited, prepared to listen and, perhaps, to understand. Eleanor sat with Oliver on her lap, the child contentedly playing with a police department coloring book that a sympathetic officer had provided. The day's events had been exhausting, yet there was a collective sense that they were on the verge of understanding something important, not just about Jason Mercer and the puppies, but about the extraordinary capacity for empathy that had brought them all together in this unexpected way. When Jason Mercer finally emerged from the interview room, accompanied by Detective Chen, his face bore the exhausted relief of someone who had carried a heavy burden for too long. The fluorescent lights of the police station's waiting area seemed harsh against his pallor, emphasizing the dark circles under his eyes and the gauntness of his cheeks. At 34, he looked a decade older. He hesitated when he saw the group waiting for him: Andrew Harrison, his former employer, whose expression remained guarded; the Parkers, who watched him with cautious curiosity; Eleanor, whose warm eyes held no judgment; and Oliver, who looked up from his coloring book with innocent interest. "Thank you for agreeing to hear me out," Jason said, his voice hoarse. Detective Chen guided him to a chair facing the others, remaining standing herself as both an observer and a mediator. "I've explained the legal situation to Mr. Mercer," Chen informed the group. "He's facing charges for theft, but given the circumstances and his cooperation, the prosecutor may consider a more lenient approach, possibly including community service and restitution rather than incarceration." Harrison nodded stiffly, his emotions clearly conflicted. "I just want to understand why Jason. Those puppies were being trained for important work." Jason's gaze dropped to his hands. "That's exactly why I took them," he admitted. "Because of the work they were meant to do." He took a deep breath, visibly steeling himself for the story he was about to share. "About a year before I came to work for you, Mr. Harrison, I had a nephew, my sister's boy, Ethan." The atmosphere in the room shifted imperceptibly at the introduction of this unknown figure. Michael and Sarah instinctively moved closer together, their hands finding each other's. "Ethan was diagnosed with severe autism when he was 3, Jason continued. "He struggled with so many things: communication, social interaction, sensory processing. My sister tried everything to help him connect with the world, Then they got matched with a service dog, a German shepherd named Max. A sad smile crossed Jason's face at the memory. The change was miraculous, isn't too strong a word. Max became Ethan's anchor, his translator to the world. When Ethan was overwhelmed, Max would apply pressure to help him calm down. When Ethan wandered, Max would guide him back. Most importantly, Ethan connected with Max in a way he couldn't with people. He talked to that dog, shared his thoughts, his fears. Jason paused, swallowing hard. Last year, Max developed a spinal condition. Despite the best veterinary care, he declined rapidly. When we lost him, Ethan withdrew completely. It was like losing all the progress they'd made over years, overnight. The waiting list for another service dog was over 2 years. He continued. My sister couldn't afford a privately trained dog. They cost upwards of $20,000. She was trying to hold everything together, working multiple jobs, caring for Ethan alone since her husband left. I felt so helpless. Harrison's expression had softened as Jason spoke. So when you came to work for me, it wasn't planned, Jason insisted. I needed a job, and I've always been good with animals. I had no intention of stealing anything. But then I learned about the litter, puppies specifically bred for service and therapy work. I saw their training assessments. I knew they had the perfect temperament, especially Scout and Nova. I tried to go through proper channels first, he said, addressing Harrison directly. I asked about the possibility of one of the puppies being placed with my nephew. I explained the situation. But I told you they were already allocated to paying clients, Harrison finished, a note of regret in his voice. I remember now. It was right before your performance started to decline. Jason nodded. I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan, how one of those puppies could change his life. I started staying late, spending extra time with the litter. The idea formed gradually. What if I could train one of them myself? I'd watched the trainers. I'd studied the methods. I convinced myself I could do it, that it would only be temporary, that somehow it would work out. But you took all 4 puppies, Sarah pointed out gently. Not just one. I panicked, Jason admitted. The night I went to take Nova, all 4 puppies were together. They started making noise when I separated them. I was afraid someone would hear, so I took them all. I told myself I'd find a way to return the others once I had Nova trained for Ethan. Where are Ethan and your sister now? Eleanor asked. Her knitting needles paused in mid-motion. Burlington. My sister moved there for a special education program for Ethan. I was planning to bring Nova to them once her basic training was complete. Jason ran a hand through his disheveled hair. I set up at the farm because it was isolated, and I knew the owner was trying to sell it. I'd been living in my car after I couldn't make rent, so it was actually an improvement. And Scout, Michael asked, how did he end up in the river? A shadow crossed Jason's face. That was a terrible accident. I took the puppies out for exercise every day. Last Sunday, we were near the river. I had them on makeshift leashes, but Scout slipped his collar. He ran toward the water. There was a family of ducks that caught his attention. I ran after him. But he fell into the water, where the current was strong. Jason's voice cracked as he continued. I waded in and managed to grab him, but he was struggling, and I lost my grip. He was swept downstream. I followed along the bank, desperate to spot him. At one point I saw him catch on something, what I now know was that plastic bag, but before I could reach him, someone approached, and I had to hide. I couldn't risk being caught. Not when I was so close to completing Nova's training for Ethan. So you left Scout there? Harrison asked, a hint of his former anger returning. No, Jason protested. I was going to circle back, try again when the person left, but then more people came. I convinced myself that someone would notice him, that he'd be safer if found by others with resources than if I tried to care for him while hiding. It was a terrible decision. I know that now. A silence fell over the group as they absorbed Jason's story. It was Eleanor who finally spoke. And Shadow, did you leave her at the mall intentionally? Jason shook his head. After Scout, I realized I was in over my head. I couldn't properly care for all 3 remaining puppies while living rough. Shadow was the one who seemed most independent, most adaptable. I thought someone would find her quickly in a place where teenagers hung out. I left food and water hidden nearby, and I checked on her every day until those kids found her. Throughout Jason's explanation, Oliver had been quietly listening, his young face solemn as he absorbed the emotional undercurrents in the room. Now, to everyone's surprise, he slid off Eleanor's lap and walked directly to Jason, stopping just in front of the man's chair. "Sad man," he stated simply, placing a small hand on Jason's knee. Jason looked startled, then deeply moved by the child's intuitive gesture. "Yes," he whispered, "I've been very sad." "Puppies help," Oliver continued, his limited vocabulary nonetheless conveying profound understanding. Tears welled in Jason's eyes. "They do," he agreed. "They help so much." Andrew Harrison cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the practical matters at hand. "What happens now?" he asked, directing the question to Detective Chen. "Your day with the puppies and with Jason." Chen glanced at her notes. "That's partly up to you, Mr. Harrison, since you're the legal owner of the puppies. As for Mr. Mercer, he'll be formally charged. But as I mentioned, there's room for the prosecutor to consider alternatives to incarceration." Harrison was quiet for a moment, his internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he turned to Jason. "Those puppies were bred for a purpose, to help people who need them. That hasn't changed." The implications of his words hung in the air. Sarah was the first to understand. "You're considering letting Ethan have one of the puppies, aren't you?" Harrison nodded slowly. "I need to verify the story, of course, and meet Ethan and his mother. But if everything checks out, Nova was identified early on as having exceptional potential for autism support work. It seems she may have found her handler." The relief on Jason's face was palpable. "Mr. Harrison, I don't know what to say. This is more than I deserve after what I did." "It's not about what you deserve," Harrison replied firmly. "It's about what Ethan deserves and what Nova was born to do. But," he added, his tone hardening slightly, "there needs to be a proper process. No more shortcuts. Your sister will need to go through the formal application, and you'll need to make restitution for the costs incurred." Jason nodded eagerly. "Anything, whatever it takes." "As for the other puppies," Harrison continued, looking now at the Parkers, "their training schedules have been disrupted, but they're still young enough to get back on track. Scout and Shadow will need to return to the kennel for assessment." Oliver, who had returned to Eleanor's side, looked up at this. "Scout, stay?" he asked, his lower lip trembling slightly at the prospect of losing his newfound friend. The adults exchanged glances. It was Dr. Bailey, who had joined them after ensuring all 4 puppies were settled at her clinic, who spoke up. "You know, there are different kinds of service dogs. Some help people with physical disabilities, others with conditions like autism. But there are also therapy dogs who provide emotional support in hospitals, schools, and other settings." She looked meaningfully at Oliver, then at his parents. "From what I've seen, Scout has a natural affinity for this kind of work. The way he responds to Oliver, how quickly he bonded with everyone. That's rare, even in breeds selected for it." Michael and Sarah shared another of their silent communications. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Sarah asked carefully. Dr. Bailey smiled. With proper training, which could be arranged through Andrew's facility, Scout could become a certified therapy dog. And who better to be his handler than the family that saved him? Or more specifically, in time, a certain young man who already has a remarkable connection with him. The possibility hung in the air, tantalizing and unexpected. "We hadn't considered adopting a dog," Michael admitted. "It's a big responsibility." "The biggest," Harrison agreed. "But I've been breeding and training working dogs for 20 years, and I've rarely seen a bond form as quickly as the one between Scout and your son. It would be a shame to break that connection." Eleanor's knitting needles clicked softly as she added her perspective. Some connections are meant to be, even if they come about in unexpected ways. Sometimes the universe has plans we couldn't possibly have made for ourselves. Over the next hour, as paperwork was completed and arrangements made, a resolution began to take shape. Jason would face legal consequences for his actions, but would be recommended for a diversion program focusing on community service, specifically helping at an animal shelter while receiving counseling. His sister and nephew would be contacted about the possibility of adopting Nova as a service dog for Ethan, with Harrison's facility providing the necessary training at a reduced cost. Titan, the largest and most confident of the litter, would return to Harrison's program to complete his training for police or search and rescue work. Shadow, whose gentle nature had been noted by all who encountered her, would be evaluated for therapy work with the possibility of placement with a family on the waiting list, perhaps even the Ramirez siblings, if their mother could be persuaded and arrangements made for managing her allergies. And Scout, the puppy whose journey had started the entire chain of events, would be fostered by the Parkers while he underwent therapy dog training, with the understanding that if all went well, the arrangement would become permanent. As the details were being finalized, Detective Chen pulled Jason aside for a final question. "There's one thing that still puzzles me," she said quietly. "After Scout was rescued and the story went viral, you must have known it was only a matter of time before you were found. Why not disappear with the remaining puppies?" Jason looked over at Oliver, who was now dozing in his mother's arms, exhausted from the day's events. "When I saw that video, the way that little boy reacted to Scout being rescued, it was exactly how Ethan used to look at Max. Pure connection, pure understanding. I realized that I'd been so focused on helping Ethan that I'd lost sight of the bigger picture. These puppies have gifts that could help more than just my nephew." He shook his head, a rueful smile crossing his face. "Besides, have you ever tried to hide from a determined German shepherd? They always find what they're looking for, one way or another. I think these puppies found exactly who they needed, and vice versa." 2 weeks later, on a perfect June morning, the Riverdale Gazette published a follow-up story with a photograph that captured the heart of the community. In it, Oliver sat on a bench in Sycamore Park, the very spot where Scout had been discovered. Beside him was Scout, now healthy and vibrant, wearing a bright blue vest that identified him as a therapy dog in training. On Oliver's other side was Ethan, a solemn 8-year-old with Nova resting her head on his lap. Behind them stood their families, the Parkers, Ethan's mother Jessica, and even Jason, who had been granted supervised visits with his nephew as part of his rehabilitation program. The photograph accompanied an article about the new community initiative that had grown from their story, the Finding Connection program, which brought together rescue animals and people in need of emotional support. Harrison's Kennels had partnered with Dr. Bailey's clinic to offer reduced-cost training for therapy and service animals, with Jason volunteering his time as part of his community service. Eleanor had been right about connections that were meant to be. What had begun as a desperate act born of love and frustration had evolved into something that benefited not just one child and one puppy, but an entire community. The river that had nearly claimed Scout's life now symbolized how seemingly random currents could bring together exactly the right people at exactly the right time. As for Oliver, He remained blissfully unaware of the impact his simple act of observation had created. To him, Scout was simply his friend, his companion, the puppy who understood him and whom he understood in return. He didn't need words to explain the bond they shared. It existed in the silent communication between them, in the gentle touch of a small hand on soft fur, in the trusting gaze of two beings who had recognized something essential in each other from the very beginning. On quiet evenings, when Oliver and Scout lay together on the living room rug, Michael would sometimes catch Sarah watching them with a peculiar expression, wonder mingled with a kind of reverence. "What are you thinking?" he asked her once. She smiled, her eyes never leaving the pair. "I'm thinking about perception," she said softly, "about how sometimes it takes a child to see what's right in front of us. Oliver didn't just see a bag in the river. He saw a life that needed saving, a connection waiting to be made." Michael nodded, understanding completely, and in saving Scout, he started a chain reaction that saved so many others, Ethan, Jason, even Harrison in his way. "You know what they say," Eleanor added from her knitting corner, her needles working steadily on what had become her contribution to the cause, handmade blankets for the kennels and shelters involved in the Finding Connection program. "Sometimes, the smallest hands can reach out and touch the whole world." Outside, the Sycamore River continued its timeless journey, carrying new stories toward those ready to perceive them. And in homes throughout Riverdale and beyond, people and puppies were finding each other, forging bonds that transcended language and circumstance, all because a toddler had pointed to something no one else had noticed, setting in motion ripples that would continue to spread in ways none of them could have imagined. Dear listeners, we hope that Oliver and Scout's heartwarming story has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. The power of connection, whether between a child and a puppy, or between strangers brought together by compassion, reminds us of the profound impact small actions can have on our world. For more emotionally captivating stories like this one, we've created a special playlist that explores these beautiful human-animal bonds. You can find it by clicking on the link to your left. If you enjoyed this journey through Riverdale, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore life's complexity and beauty in all its forms. What special connection has changed your life? Perhaps you have your own story about an animal who touched your heart or a chance encounter that led to something meaningful. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Until our next story, remember that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unexpected places.